Welcome, and let's take a look at some additional examples from lesson 6.2. This would be the first 5 problems from the practice set. Well, that's loaded. We'll get this back to a classic click. Get that off there. Excuse me. So we want to write the number in 2 equivalent forms. So they're giving us a decimal, so we want to write this as a fraction, and then we'll write it as a percent, right? Because this lesson is all about relating fractions, decimals, and percents. Now, we are starting with 0.38. And there's 2 ways to go about doing this. We could look at 0.38, and if you read that, that's 38 hundredths. So we write it as 38. Actually, no, I was doing 2 ways. I was thinking of something else. 38 over 100. Well, there's our fraction. Now you might notice that can simplify, and you could say, oh, that's 19/50ths, and so on. And like, no, actually, that's simplified right there. So, but we can just enter the 38 over 100. And we check our answer, and we're doing good. Okay. Now, here's the part where we could go about 2 ways. First, we could just look at the fraction we wrote, and remember, it's percent is like the parts per 100. So here we have 38 over 100. So that's 38%. Another thing we can do is if we want to find the percent, we can just take this 0.38, and we can multiply that by 100. And you find that it's 0.038 with 2 decimal places. So remember, when you multiply by 100, you're just moving the decimal over 2 places. 1, 2. And then we would then add the percent sign onto that, and that would be 38%. So there's 2 ways of doing it. If you're just going straight from the decimal to percent, I find this can be easier, but if you have the fraction in front of you, especially a fraction over what the denominator is 100, you just read that top value. So this is going to be 38%. We check our answer, and we're doing great, right? So sometimes some strategies are easier than others to use. It just kind of depends on the situation that you're in. Moving on to our next problem. This time we have the fraction 3 over 100, and we want to write an equivalent decimal, and then we'll write an equivalent percent. Well, we're just going to take this the other way. 3 over 100, right? That's 3 100ths. So we can write that as 0. Then put a 0 in the 10th spot and 3 in the 100th spot, because we have 3 100ths. So there's our equivalent decimal, 0.03. Check our answer. Of course, we're doing great. Woohoo! And then we want to write the equivalent percent. Well, you can either go here and think, oh, I'm just going to multiply the decimal by 100, and then I get 3%. Or remember that it's percent per 100. Look at the numerator of the fraction with the denominator of 100, and in this case, it's 3%. So just showing you some different looks at this. 3%. Hitting next. Oh, wait, nope, got to check our answer. We don't want to lose that progress. All right, on to the third question. Now we have a percent, 64%. We want to write that as a decimal, and then we'll write it as a fraction. Well, we can go and say, hey, wait a minute, check this out. This is 64%. So if we want to write that as a decimal, we just remember that percent is per 100. And we can say that that's 64%. Oops, wrong thing. Oh, having issues with the marker. 64%, well, we know that the percent there is per 100, so we can write that as 64 over 100. So 64 hundredths, which we know we can write as 0.64. And so our equivalent decimal would be 0.64. But remember how when we were converting, and here's another way to do it. So remember how when we were converting, we said, oh, if we have a decimal, we can multiply it by 100 to get its percent. If we have a percent and we want to go to a decimal, we can divide by 100. So if we take this 60, really have issues with this on this problem, 64, and we divide it by 100, remember, we're just moving the decimal over 2 places. That's 0.64. We just move that decimal over 2 places like that. So when we are multiplying by 100, we move the decimal to the right 2 places. And then when we divide by 100, we move it left 2 places. And so we get 0.64, which is the value that we've already come up with. That little box just followed me all over the place. And get my check answer. It's spot on. That's good. So we got 2 ways of going about going from percent to decimal. And if we go on to our next problem here, what is the equivalent fraction? We already have a fraction. That first method we used generated a fraction. So we know this fraction is 64 over 100. And if you want, we can go ahead and we'll have a little fun with it on this one since we've already done this before. We can say, oh, well, that's equivalent to 50, 32 over 50. Let's go again. 32 over 50, we can half that again. And so that's equivalent to 16 25ths. And we're like, now that's a good place to stop. So let's go ahead. We can come over, instead of entering the 64 100ths, which we know will work, we're going to enter the 16 25ths. It's an equivalent fraction, so it should also work. Check our answer. No surprise, that works as well. Just showing you a little variety there. And moving on to our fourth question. Okay. Now they're giving us a fraction and they want us to write it as a decimal and percent. Now this time our fraction is not over 100, it's 1/8. So you can say, okay, well, what could I multiply the top and the bottom by so that my denominator is 100, and then I know this will be my percent, right? Well, off the top of my head, I don't know what this would be. I don't know what that's going to be. Top of my head, don't know. So what I am going to do is let's go ahead and clear that out. It's like, I know, though, I can do the division because 1/8 is actually division. So I can take 1 and divide it by 8. Now, 8 doesn't go into 1, right? So we need to put a decimal in there, and we need to annex a 0. And we do know that 8 goes into 10 one time. And so then this starts looking like a regular division problem. It's just we're going from a fraction to a decimal. And that 10 minus 8 is 2. And we need another 0. We're going to keep going here until we have no remainder. Because I know this one doesn't have we can keep going and we can find that spot. 8 goes into 22 times. That's 16. And the difference of that is 4. And there's our sweet spot right there. 40. Right? When we annex that another 0 down there, we get 40. And we know that 5 times 8 is 40 with no remainder. So that decimal is 0.125. Check our answer. Well done. Fantastic. I like that. I like that. So now we need to find that equivalent percent. Remember that trick we talked about earlier? if we're given a decimal, we want to find the percent, we can just multiply it by 100. So we're going to take our decimal right here. And when we multiply by 100, we're moving our decimal to the right 2 places. 10 would move 1, 100 makes it 2. So our decimal goes there. And so that's 12.5, and you need to add the percent sign, percent. So 0.125 is equivalent to 12.5%. But over here, we only need to put in the 12.5. It would get mad at us if we put in that symbol, the percent symbol there. Check our answer. And we are cruising right along. On to our last question. Oh, not yet. There we go. On to our last question. Write the decimal. What decimal shows the combined portion made up of the element 1 and element 2? So we have this chart, beautiful chart. And we're focusing on element 1 and 2, which are like our purple pink here. And that's this part. And so of our pie chart, and that's element 1 is 15%. And element 2 is 15%. So element 1 and 2 combined make up a total of 30%. Now, whoa, before we get too excited and put the 30 in there, 30% or even 30 in there, they want to know the decimal. So we can, remember with percentages, we want to go to a decimal. We can move the decimal place. We divide by 100. Remember that trick I showed you? We're dividing by 100. So we move the decimal 1, 2 places right there. So it's 0.3. And then we drop the percent. So 30% is equivalent to 0.3. How do we know that's right? Well, we can also say that 30% is 30 over 100 parts. And these are both powers of 10, which simplify to 3/10, which is our decimal right there. So it's going to be the combined portion of element 1 and 2 is shown by the decimal 0.3. Woohoo! There we have it. And that's it. That's all, folks, for those additional Lesson 6-2 examples.